Thanks. Good evening, everyone. Tonight is a work session of the South Kingstown Planning Board. The date is Tuesday, September 20, 2022. Our first item is roll call. Joe Murphy. Here. Susan Axelrod. Here. Paul Jordan.
Here.
Liz Karp.
Here.
Peter DiStefano. Here. Robin Pothier.
Here.
And Maria Mack is here. Our next agenda item is, it's really a combined agenda item of sorts: Green Complete Streets Ordinance, Draft Ordinance, and Draft Bicycle Pedestrian Master Plan. Jamie, would you just like to give the board a little bit of background on this and where we're at?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, as Maria has stated this evening, Agenda Item B and Agenda Item C are really interchangeable with regards to the order we take them in. The BPAC was formed a number of years ago with a mission statement, and I'll just read that mission statement to you quickly. The Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee is an ad hoc special purpose body of the town whose mission is to promote walking and biking across the community, including but not limited to incorporating the consideration of the needs of cyclists and pedestrians in the town's circulation system and infrastructure through education and outreach efforts involving town officials, residents, and commercial entities. The committee evaluates and makes recommendations to the town council regarding general bikeable and walkable initiatives. It is a appointed committee via the town council. We have 3 members here this evening who are interested in listening to staff, primarily planning and the town manager's office. Look at what the BPAC has done to date. Look at their plan that they have put together, as well as their proposed ordinance and other samples from Newport and other municipalities. And also to bring those items to the planning board to seek input. And also the council asks that staff review all this information and then report back to the council with a recommendation. So you were giving a few things in association with tonight's work session. Along with the agenda, there was a draft ordinance, there was a copy of the BPAC presentation, and there was also a link to the draft master plan. And again, we distributed this information ahead of time to give you an opportunity, but it's my understanding a few may not have realized that the draft master plan was a link. And even once you found that you may not have had adequate time to fully read that draft plan. Again, it's listed as a draft master plan. You'll hear me refer to it as a plan. My background, 34 years as a planner, is I used to be the co-chair of the Bicycle Pedestrian Committee for the state of Connecticut Department of Transportation, and I co-chaired that committee with Bill O'Neill, who was the founder of Fuss & O'Neill, who in essence is spearheaded the East Coast Greenway and the bike initiative throughout New England. I want to refer to him as a former mentor of mine and in essence the father of the bike ped movement in New England states. I'm used to fully engulfed master plans that are done very detailed, typically by a consultant, and they range in the 150 to 250 pages and really lay out the needs, desires, and wants of a community. So again, I applaud the efforts of the BPAC on the information they prepared in their document that we distributed you this evening. It's a little bit of the background. It's a little bit of why we're here. Again, we're looking for guidance or comments that you may have as a planning board that we can incorporate into our staff review and report back to council. And again, from my perspective, if people aren't comfortable this evening making full comments and would like either 2 weeks to push this to a segment of our regularly scheduled agenda towards the end of that or to the next work session, I am more than comfortable of someone making that recommendation at the end of the discussion.
Thanks, Jamie. How comfortable are folks with, obviously, the the draft policy document is easier than looking at the 70-page plan. I don't know how many of you read through the 70 pages. Do folks have comments on this, probably the more simple, obviously?
I do, yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but before we get into it, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about what it is we're looking at, because I've heard ordinance and policy. I think it was on the agenda as ordinance, and the document.
Policy on the
Yeah,
document,
to
right.
me, the document is something like this as an ordinance, but the others that have done so have adopted it as a policy, which is how it's being presented. You know, a policy is something that's not binding in the same way that an ordinance is, but it certainly, if adopted, would guide the town's activities.
Thanks, Amy.
And Maria, just one clarification. As the planning director for the town, I fully support any effort by the community to seek funding to develop a master plan for bike and pedestrian movement, complete streets, green streets, incorporated into one document. So.
Yes, and you know, reading through the 70-page plan, it's clear that a lot of time and thought and effort went into it. So I think that even if everyone has not obviously absorbed that, we should at least look at this, and it would be helpful to have comments from board members. Complete street.
Afternoon. I've lived here since 1998. I've been cycling all over town, not to the extent that Ken does in the rain. After the fact, and there's that threat sort of hanging out there that if you speed, you might get caught and you'll get a hefty fine. But the idea of speed tables and bump outs at curbs and traffic calming things, I know it came up about Old North Road at the council meeting, I think, last week. And I've spent some time driving around Providence looking at these things. They're very effective. They're very effective. They're attractive. You know, there's one in front of the State House that will launch you into outer space if you hit it at 30 miles an hour. Most of them are designed a little bit better, maybe because of that. I would love to see those on our roads here in South Kingston. I've cycled on roads all over the state. Some are truly frightening. But, you know, places like South Road, High Street, Old North Road, they're speedways. Cards Pond Road, you know, it's an Arrow Street Road. And people like to say, oh, it's the URI students. It is, but it's everybody. You know, you get on a nice smooth piece of pavement and the speed limit says 25, and you're like, yeah, 25 means 40. But if there are speed tables and bump outs that force you to slow down, as a pedestrian or a cyclist, somebody trying to cross the street, I know that traffic can't go fast on that road versus, hey, I might get hit and then maybe that guy will get a ticket or I can sue him from my hospital bed. I much prefer the idea of he can't go much faster than I can on my bicycle. And I noticed looking at the policy that we mentioned in several places, stormwater being really important, but the policy doesn't reference the idea of speed tables and bump outs as much as it does. You know, we should really be concerned about stormwater. So I'd like to see, I think Jamie's right, we need a really well-developed plan. But I think the policy needs to say quite clearly that the town will be looking at developing those sorts of speed controls. You know, we can put out the flashing radar, you know, speed limit 25, you're doing 50. Those are nice while they're there, but, you know, again, it's sort of an enforcement tool rather than a permanent, effective traffic control. So I'm very much in favor of seeing it, doing everything that we can to develop this idea of complete streets that are for everyone, not just cars.
Yes, thanks, Paul. And there are a couple of serious speed tables on campus at URI.
Flag Road, and they're very effective on Flag Road. It's 20-mile-an-hour road.
Right, right. Any other initial comments before we go through this? All right, let's have a,
Sorry, I have
go
a
ahead.
So I have a question that might be directed to Paul. So as a bicyclist, how do you negotiate bump outs? And aren't you then forced to get off the shoulder and ride your bicycle in the traffic lane? Whereas you were sort of on the shoulder and suddenly there's an obstacle in your way. And how, as a bicyclist, how do you negotiate that without being in traffic?
On those streets in Providence that have the bump outs, typically cars, they're busy neighborhoods, cars are parked there anyway. The traffic generally, and particularly up around the PC, Rhode Island College, someone on a bicycle are effectively traveling at almost the same speed. Yeah.
Madam Chair, if I may, Susan, to potentially address or try and respond to your question, typical bump outs are more that Paul references in some aspects are more typical of an urbanized setting in a more dense area. So if you look at everybody familiar on Main Street where the Comfort Station is, and that crossing, which has a signalized button for pedestrians and cyclists to cross. Most people push that button, cross, then the light turns yellow. They're through the crosswalk by the time it turns red, and then the traveling public in the roadway is sitting there at a red light with no one in the crosswalk. So there's probably a sequence issue with the timing, push button, and crossing. The second aspect there is we're working with DOT on that particular intersection where the pedestrian is on the sidewalk right now and the cyclist is on the sidewalk. They actually have to enter into the traveled way where they're hidden behind a parked car before they can, in some instances, be seen as they cross the street. So the mindset of the bump out and even a tabletop in that location is the bump out would give the pedestrian another 6 to 8 feet to safely stand or be on the side of their bike or straddle their bike before they enter the traveled way, before there's a conflict with a vehicle. The pedestrian or cyclist who's on Main Street, their traveled way wouldn't be affected because they're sneaking in between the car and the parked car. So there would still, if there was only a 2-foot lane width there unstriped, the bump out wouldn't affect that. So you're not changing the effective lane width of the traveled way. You're just giving an additional safe haven for the pedestrian in a true bump out scenario in a downtown setting. A tabletop that would be located on South Road or another location would in essence take the bike path across that grade. Or the bicyclist would rise up onto the tabletop, so it would slow the cyclist down because they would be going up onto the tabletop, as well as the vehicle, which would be entering in essence an intersection with a raised pavement structure. And they're not speed bumps, they're not speed humps. They are gentle changes in grade that change the elevation to a top of a table, which then you reduce and have a slight grade change when you exit. So it's designed to slow, not stop a vehicle. So it's not something that you're doing 35 that you have to slow to 2 or 3 or 4 miles per hour because you would need a front end alignment if you didn't. But it's designed to take that car and reduce the speed from 35, 40, and 50 to 20, 25. If you hit them at 30, you're gonna know that you hit a tabletop. But there's two aspects, and I think the BPAC has done a good role in what they're doing. I think there's an additional role as they move forward, as well as the town in education. I sat for 35 minutes on South Road, and in that 35 minutes, 55 to 56 cyclists went through that intersection. None of them stopped at the stop sign that they have, either headed westbound or eastbound. So, now, the time of day I was there, I want to say most of the traffic was local. The cars were slowing down before they even saw a cyclist in that crossing. So they're aware of the fact that the cyclists aren't stopping, and they're looking by force of nature and habit because they know they're not stopping. So it's an enforcement on both sides. An enforcement on the vehicular side, and it's an enforcement and education on the cyclist side.
Thanks, Jamie. And, it's really about smart design. Traffic calming has been around for quite some time now. It originated, I believe, in the Netherlands in the 1960s, but I would say it's probably only within the last maybe 20 years that our Department of Transportation has embraced traffic calming, so to speak, and there are a lot of techniques that go beyond the tables that we're talking about and bump outs. Some of them are visual ways that slow the traffic down, but all making very good sense. Why don't we have a look at the first page and see if anyone has comments on definitions and the initial portion of vision and intent.
Again, I think just in this definition of greening complete streets, streets designed and operated to safely and comfortably accommodate all street users, I think there needs to be something there about, slowing traffic, some sort of language in there.
I had a couple of comments under vision and intent, the fourth sentence, first paragraph, where there's a reference to open spaces. I would also include a reference to greenways. We do have a greenway master plan, which actually is referenced in the other plan, the more lengthy plan. The other thing is that I think the last paragraph is important when it talks about connecting all parts of the town, and I would also add to green infrastructure. There's a mention of treating air pollution and beautifying streets, but it also has an impact on reduction of heat island effect. It improves water quality. It helps to mitigate stressors from climate change. Is everyone ready to go to page 2? Okay. So the latter portion of the vision and intent, and then diverse users and jurisdiction. Any thoughts on this?
Sorry, can I ask
Sure.
Can I ask another question? So is this going to be an enforceable policy for every road project in town? Or are these gentle suggestions for our vision of what we hope that people would do? I guess I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, that's what Amy actually referred to.
A good question we may not have a particular direct answer for. And again, I said agenda items, these two agenda items, B and C, are interchangeable. So you're looking at a policy before the development of a master plan. So it's, yeah.
Right.
Again, Susan, my experience with both policy and ordinance for complete street type language. Policy drives initiative and review and gives staff direction, developers direction, staff departments, projects that the town undertakes to try and adhere to a policy that the town council has set. Like, if you look at item number 3 on page 2, it says streets shall be designed and planned to accommodate. Well, you can't design and accommodate everything. So a policy would be, it is our intent to try and accommodate when streets are designed to meet the needs of X, Y, and Z. That's a policy. If that was even language in an ordinance, it's an ordinance still giving directive. It's not an ordinance that gives anyone the ability to write a ticket. So those items associated with writing a ticket are associated with police powers and general traffic and guidance under Rhode Island law or any particular ordinance that the town has as it relates to law enforcement. So a policy for complete streets is not a ticketing endeavor, it's not an enforcement endeavor. It just takes a policy statement one step further, and instead of perhaps saying you shall evaluate, it may say you shall do. And again, it's just, an ordinance is a stronger version of a policy.
I think, it's a little bit like the comprehensive plan, which is sort of like the pirate code. It's guidelines rather than, but I think ideally, as with the comp plan, we would like to see some of this stuff have more teeth, right? Rather than just, here's something we'd all like to see, but we may never actually get there.
Not to change topics per se, but one of the things that I thought about as I was reading through the plan was that it might strengthen it to make it more like the comprehensive plan, whereby you have specific goals and then you have implementation and who is responsible for that. That's really just kind of format more than anything, but that was one of the things. But to Susan's point too, we all know how important language is when we read ordinances and regulations, and the fact that there are a lot of shalls is good because it means it's serious, it's strong, it's not a may. So I think that's definitely a positive. But again, specifics, when Susan asked about streets, right? Are we talking about only new streets? Are we talking about something that's undergoing a repaving project? Or again, you need to be specific if you're going to write an ordinance. And that's, so other thoughts on this page?
Can I just bring up the bike lane in front of Staples?
Sure.
I would never let my children ride in that lane, and I never see anyone ride in that lane. So if that's what we're looking for and that's going to comply with our wording, what good is that? Nobody rides in that lane. You'd be nuts.
I think there are varying degrees of design and safety with regard to bike lanes, and I believe that when that project moved forward, it was not considered necessarily the best bike. It was almost like an add-on. So yeah, they're, again, varying.
Jersey barriers or something.
But people do use it, and I think that the striping, the new traffic islands with the trees and the vegetation, I think all of those things together slow down that section of road.
Yes.
And that's ideally what, slower is safer for everybody.
And
It might slow it a little, but still, there's no way of knowing whether a bike is going to be there or not, and they're never there, so you don't even think about them.
And that's where you get to,
Go
yep,
right across that bike lane all the time.
right. And that's why design is so important, because you see some bike lanes where you have a strip, a green space strip, and then you have the bike lane internal to that. So, yep.
And again, to Madam Chair, to Robin's point, there's a, and to Paul's follow-up, there's a host of standards when you're dealing with bike lanes and the treatment for those with regards to pavement markings. Again, I applaud RIDOT's efforts. We have 16 crossings in town of our bike and pedestrian system as a trail system, but there are, I believe, 7 different treatments to those crossings right now. So the residents don't recognize that, but the traveling public does. I don't know if I'm approaching it as a non-resident, whether it's a pedestrian crossing or a bike crossing. So again, we're trying to look for similarity throughout the system. So if you've seen a raised green or 6-foot wide striped, over time, you're going to recognize that that's a bike lane. And in some aspects, DOT, or when you try new initiatives, it's easy to remove a white stripe and move it left or right. It's harder to remove 6 feet of green or red paint and do that. So a lot of times there's phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And phase 1 may have been a white stripe. Phase 2 may be striping the entire lane, a color consistent with your bike crossings. Communities like Portland, Oregon have gone through this. Boston is probably the leader in New England on their bike ped complete street movements, and they've gone through trial and error. They've gone through a single stripe to a painted lane to a median. And you're seeing that evolve over time. So, every day someone's learning something different and something new and a better way to do it.
And Jamie, to that end, also under jurisdiction, where it states that street projects shall be constructed to green and complete street standards, there's nothing that says that we can't develop our own sort of customized standards for South Kingstown that are best for our community and the best fit, correct?
Correct, Maria, and I think that's some of the difficulties in creating the policy without the plan, is that if someone was doing a 1,200-foot cul-de-sac, are you putting a sidewalk, a bike lane, and 2 travel lanes in that? Because this says all street projects shall be constructed, and, and again, wording and vetting, this would be, jurisdiction. Street projects should contemplate constructing to the green and complete street standards as shown in the master plan. And to Maria's point, the master plan may have a standard for a short cul-de-sac, a long cul-de-sac, a large development, a small development. And I look at things historically like South County Commons. There are multiple pods of development in South County Commons, but there isn't really a plan for the interconnection of those. So the town potentially would have benefited from a policy, because if I was a planning director and the developer was in my office early on, I could say, well, just don't forget as you develop this, we have a policy that you have to consider complete streets and accommodating movements throughout your development. And the developer would probably say, well, that's just a policy, Mr. Rabbit. And then if I went one step further as time evolves, I could say, no, it's not just a policy, it's an ordinance. And we have a master plan to back it up. So there are steps that give us more tools in the toolbox, and over time, those tools get sharpened. And they get more strategic over time. And I applaud the efforts of BPAC to stop, this ball's rolling down the hill and gaining momentum. And I don't want necessarily the process to be slowed. I want it to continue. But again, council has laid out a process for us.
Other thoughts on this page? On the first paragraph under jurisdiction, my least favorite expression that we hear all the time, to me that represents how to get out of doing something, is the greatest extent practicable. As everyone knows, we hear that from folks who don't want to do things. And we want to make sure that there's strong language in anything that's adopted. And then I would say the portion of the sentence relating to provide additional landscaping for aesthetic purposes, I would again modify, as I suggested earlier, that it has to do with water quality, mitigation of climate change impacts, reduction of heat island effects, and so on. It's not just for aesthetics, it's multifunctional. And I would also say enhance the character of South Kingstown rather than only the architectural character. I did have a question on the third paragraph under jurisdiction when it discusses application of this policy on private property projects, only that would have to be made more understandable and specific.
And again, I think there, Maria, the development of a standard, either regulatory-wise or as examples in a master plan would be important. Again, South County Commons, as an example, was private property. It wasn't a public project. It was private property going through a permitting process as allowed by zoning. But again, having that initiative and foresight to say there is a policy or an ordinance and a plan, and the developer needs to meet the criteria contained within these plans. Make every effort to.
And then in the last paragraph, the intent is very good. The town shall make good faith efforts to foster partnerships with State of Rhode Island and so on. Those are the kind of statements and specifics that similar to what we have in the comprehensive plan, that you would want to see in a master plan. whereby you have a goal and an objective, and then you have the implementation of that. And also reference, I just put a note here, but it could be anywhere in this, and it's referred to in the longer plan, the reference to the scenic roadway in South Kingstown. Page 3? Sure.
Resources meaning dollars?
That's what it always means, Rich.
No. Well, you know, it's, well, so the green part of this worries me a little bit because we do not have the resources or the skill to maintain some of the structures that we're talking about. Those types of things worry me. We also have green covered under a couple of different places in our ordinances, and we have water quality covered under other places in our ordinances. So those types of things worry me a little bit. But again, policy versus ordinance, I mean, there's a big difference there, and if it's policy, then I think that the policy would probably say, we got to look towards these other ordinances, and that would help. Yeah, but as far as resources along those lines, we really don't. And the dollars, so to give you a little bit of a rundown, I mean, we repave about them, and I believe that the BPAC, and we've talked about this, I think that the BPAC, and I'm not going to speak for them, but let's say they were looking to make this so it applies to all projects in town. Let's just speculate that that's what's happening. But so when we repave a road, we would have to look to this ordinance. We spend approximately $700,000, $800,000 to pave about a mile of road every year. We've got 150 miles of road in town, and so we're only pecking at it. But we've done about 30 to 40 miles of road repaved, and we also stone seal. We do these other preventative things. Would stone seal fall under all of this? Would paving fall under this? If we were held up to follow an ordinance that was super strict, and I don't believe this really is actually, but if it were super strict, then that would become an issue. We would not have we would have to put it out for engineering, everything, because I'm not going to speculate where safely, speed tables can happen, or some of the things that we're not normally doing, I guess, or looking towards some of these other traffic calming things, but so there's a lot of other parts of this. The painting, painting. If you look at Flag Road as a good example, there's a lot of paint out there, and we only have $29,000 a year to repaint all. So there's a lot of money that could be. It could be. The council could look to say, we want to do these things, and we want to give you money for those things. And that could happen too. And if that were to happen, then that kind of changes the game a little bit. But it would just slow the process down for us. It would be cumbersome if it was more than just, if we couldn't go and just repave a road like we do. Roads fall apart, by the way. So look at Matunic Beach Road is falling apart. It's getting done within months of when we really figured out we had to get it done right away. But would we be able to do that? I don't know. So those types of things scare me a little bit.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, absolutely.
Just to follow up on that, I think, yeah, the painting of a lot of this stuff, sidewalks are expensive, a mile or 5 miles of sidewalks. But the addition of a speed table on a road that you paved 6 months ago shouldn't be there's a cost to that, but you're not talking about redoing the whole road. You're talking about re-engineering a small piece of it. And I'm not saying that we need hundreds of speed tables around town. I think there are certain locations that are crying out for them, but.
Okay, so that's a great comment. So, but you're right. We wouldn't be speed tables all over town. But even to put one in, I'd want it engineered. I'd want a traffic engineer to look at it. I want traffic counts, because we are liable should somebody get hurt. Now, I was at DOT. I worked for DOT for a very short while, but I was there when they installed that speed hump up at the State House. right? And we sat there at lunchtime and watched people launch into the air. And I don't know what happened to the claims on all that, but I got to expect that it was expensive. And I wouldn't want that to happen. I certainly wouldn't want anybody to get hurt. So I'd want it engineered, first of all. So there's a cost there. But this ordinance doesn't target, like you're saying. Like, I would rather see that we said, okay, you bring up Tower Hill Road, Old Tower Hill Road. And to me, it makes perfect sense when you think about a very quick connection on Pershing Ave over to the bike path. Or if you think about a lane that goes from Dale Carlia Corner over to Old Mountain Field, because then you're going all the way to the Commons, right? Because we've got a bike path, we've got a bike path behind Old Mountain Field that goes over to the dog park, and then it goes over. Then you got a bike. So when you start to make all that interconnectivity, it makes more sense. So if we were to target an ordinance that said, well, if you're working on that road, these are the things we're going to want to see. That would make more sense to me, and those would be. But this is a broad brush. It's like I've been to the Netherlands, I've been to France and Belgium, right? Not every road in Amsterdam has a bike lane. In fact, a vast majority of the roads are share the road. We already have share the road. It's like typical for the U.S. to say we want everything to have it's like America, but that's not the way it is in Europe. The majority of the roads are share the roads. So what I would suggest is that we look at targeting specific areas with an overall look at how we make that connectivity. And then I think places like Old Tower Hill Road make perfect sense. And I think it will make sense at some point, but I understand what you're saying. It's a little clumsy, but it'll make sense in the long run. And that was the bike path has actually helped bring about some of that change on that road. And I think that was the long game, I think. So 2 cents.
Are you done? So actually, that's interesting that you mentioned Dale Carlia Corner. So some of the major thoroughfares in town are state roads. How does this apply to state resurfacing or reconstruction projects? Because, 108 and Kingstown Road and Old Tower Hill Road are all state roads. So I don't know what the state's opinion of this is, or how
Well,
you,
keep in mind that Old Tower Hill Road is a state road.
yes.
So those requirements came, and actually, we had sat down with with PAR Engineering early on to say they were suggesting these bike lanes, and so we can bring about those things with the state when those projects come up. So you could see that interconnectivity later on those roads, just like we did on Old Tower Road.
So I'm thinking about it.
Susan, any discussion with the state, whether you're in Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Vermont, in most instances, they're limited to Peter's discussion, what are their resources? But when you sit at the table and can say, we have a plan, the plan has been adopted, we either have a policy and an ordinance to back the plan. When you start the discussion on any design implications that the state is undertaking on a system within your town, you defer to the plan. So if they're redoing, in front of, if they take a section, I'm trying to think if they were redoing from High Street and Main Street back to Route 1, and you said, we want bike lanes, DOT may say, well, do you have a plan for that? Have you ever evaluated it? Is there a policy associated with that? And the answer right now would potentially be no. But 2 or 3 years from now, you may be able to say, we have a plan, it's been vetted, it's been adopted by council, and we have policy or an ordinance to support the plan. So when you repave, or when you're doing curbing, or when you're doing drainage improvements, we would like you to incorporate the following, because the following is in our plan. It's an easier discussion with any state agency, whether you're doing storm drainage, or whether you're doing bike ped, if you're doing road diet. If you have a document to fall back on, it's a different conversation.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. But, so I'm just considering a brand-new state roadway that was just completely reconstructed, and they removed all the sidewalks and crosswalks from that road, which seems counter to the idea that the state is multimodal friendly to remove sidewalks and crosswalks.
I believe-
So I would hate to see, for example, them decide that we don't need crosswalks on High Street anymore, and then, or sidewalks, and then start removing them. And I don't know if this policy holds their feet to doing it the right way.
I think the project you may be referring to had some jurisdictional issues between state and local government. It was a state road surrounded by other governmental property. So we don't necessarily have a seat at that table when those decisions are being made. But again, if we had a policy, if we had a plan, it would be easier to interject into those types of projects.
Thank you.
Can you just talk briefly about the state TIP, the Transportation Improvement Plan? I guess my understanding of that has always been that towns can set priorities. Like, if South Kingstown were to say, our number one priority for state spending is a sidewalk along Route 108, there might not be money to do the whole thing, but that sort of rises to the top of DOT's project list if that's our top priority.
It
Supposed to.
It gets on DOT's priority list, whether it rises to the top of DOT's priority list, it is a question, because Rich can correct me. Sidewalks on Route 108 have been a goal of the town for a while.
For a while, yeah.
And didn't it take 30 years to get High Street on the tip?
Yes.
And Old Tower Road, I believe, as well. But, so each year they tell, or not every year, I guess it's every few years or so, they request some information from us on what we're most interested in, and then usually it'll come from the plan department in this town, and then we'll collectively talk about what's important. And I believe the planning board may be involved in that at some point.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Planning board reviews the tip.
yeah, okay.
So again, going back, if you have a document, it's easier to have that conversation with the state that, hey, you're redoing your tip and we have this new document that reprioritized projects. So when we know you have the repaving of 108, well, our policy document, which is a adopted master plan, shows sidewalks and drainage improvements, and here's our cross-section we're looking for you to do. So again, it's an easier discussion when you have a seat at the table.
I was very pleased to see on the list of standards, the LID, Site Planning and Design Guidance Manual, and as board members may recall, a couple of meetings ago, we talked about doing an LID assessment. So I think that's a very important element, as well as, I didn't see a specific reference to traffic calming with regard to the ITE handbook, and what I was able to find was that they have a series of e-primer modules relating to traffic calming. So although it's not in their main manual, it's now part of the mindset, which is very helpful. And, going back to Jamie's comments about having a well-written policy or ordinance, whatever it ends up being, will in the long run help us with regard to the state. Although I disagree with Rich about he's not comfortable with the green. I think we have to embrace green for many reasons. And at the bottom, second from the last paragraph on page 3, again, there's the landscaping for aesthetic purposes, and that needs to be made more clear and more specific to my comments from before. Does anyone else have any comments on page 3?
So on page 3, am I reading that we already have a bicycle and pedestrian master plan? North Kingstown, right? So
We do not have a master plan.
what's the 6th bullet on page 5?
Yes, it makes a reference to a master plan that we're talking about. That's the the 70-something page document is the beginnings of something like that, and developing that kind of a plan, if the council is amenable to do so and is willing to designate funding to fully develop something like that. Anything else on this page? Let's go to page 4.
I think the second paragraph is pretty good. I particularly like the sentence, "Through corridor should be designed for smooth traffic flow, but may not compromise green and complete street standards." Right? Yes, we want to get traffic through, but not to the expense of all the other street users.
What's street furniture?
Bike racks, benches, light poles, all that. Edge of curb to front of building, amenities.
And in the last paragraph, just before you get to 6 exceptions, where the discussion is about historic zoning districts, probably a reference to South Kingstown HDC would be appropriate, either here or in the longer version of a plan. But again, just a reference to the appropriate body.
Again, Madam Chair, as you go through this, there's a lot of language in here that if there was a fully vetted, adopted master plan, this language gets reduced because the plan is the guiding document. So,
Well, hopefully comments that we make will help to influence the future plan. Again, under street selection criteria, thus beautification where it needs to be more appropriately described in terms of climate change, water quality, et cetera. And then specifics in the last paragraph, infrastructure investments shall be mapped, quantified, and evaluated to ensure alignment with green and complete street standards, and it would be South Kingstown version thereof. But again, all of those details could be made more specific in a master plan, so that there's nothing that's vague in this document.
And I'd just like to comment that I really appreciate the comment about disinvestment and underinvestment and making sure that neighborhoods are treated equitably and that the resources are spread into the best uses, not discriminating against some neighborhoods. I'm really happy to see that they put that in here.
So Maria, on the street selection criteria, this actually goes also back to a page that we had already gone by, diverse uses. One of the things that kind of strikes me a little funny is we say special attention in design and planning of a project shall be given to addressing the needs of people with disability and elderly. And so the proposed improvements may make a measurable difference. I mean, it's hard to, argue, elderly and disabled, you want to make sure you get them taken care of, but it seems almost like bikes, paths are kind of like this chicken and egg thing where we haven't given as much attention because there hasn't been as much demand, but there hasn't been demand because you really don't have the good places in town to ride your bikes, right? And it almost seems that you more bang for your buck would be making sure that you are meeting the needs of those demographics that are most likely to use it. So, I think of kids that are 14 and 15 that can't drive yet but want to go to their friends. I think of the demographics of the people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s who want to live a healthy lifestyle. It almost seems like, since that would be possibly a bigger user, we don't want to not give attention there. You know, to me, you want to kind of give the attention to the ones that are going to have the most use, because you want to get this ball rolling. So that's one thing. The other thing is on the street criteria. I think one of the things maybe missing is making sure that we get the connectivity to all those areas in town that really make this town special. So the thing that really sticks out to me is, it's almost like, from a bike and pedestrian, it's almost like you live in two towns. If you live on south side of Route 1, you got access to water, you got access to beaches, your kids can go to the beach during the day when you're working. You live on the north side of Route 1, that's not accessible to you, especially the Matunic area. So it's almost like two separate towns. So when we talk about street selection, I think we really need to be looking at making sure that we have connectivity to all those areas that make this town special. And it's accessible for the whole town.
Yes, good point.
Are you referring to something like a bridge across Route 1?
I don't know. I mean, I spend a lot of time, because I have some property on the south side of Route 1, and I'll tell you, you go to Matunic Schoolhouse Road, and all day, people are biking, people are walking, people are jogging. You don't see that on this side. I mean, there's just so much heavier use over there. I live over on Tuckertown Road. I try to bike Tuckertown, Ministerio, South Road, you know, Curtis Corner, and there are places there that I'm just trying to get off. You know, Ministerial Road, a lot of places, there's just no shoulder to ride. I mean, I know everybody says Ministerial has a shoulder, but there's places that are very, very thin, and it's pavement's unraveling. So, again, I just see so much more use, probably because it's a lot more enjoyable for people to use that. So I don't want to lose that, you know, the importance of emphasizing the demographic that's most likely to use it, even if they're not necessarily vulnerable.
We've ridden
And
our
also
bikes
the
across Route 1
connectivity.
so many times to the,
I can't even imagine telling my kids to ride bike across Route 1. You know, it's just, so it's almost like a different town,
the bridge would be wonderful.
some way. I mean, the whole Matunic area is kind of lost. I mean, you get to Narragansett by the bike path, but the whole Matunic area is lost to the town if you don't live on that side of Route 1.
And I think a well-written master plan would evaluate user demographics. And I think there's some information that has already been put into the plan that we received as well. Page 5.
I have a question about one part of page 5 on the annual report. One of the items on the annual report is number and location of ADA-compliant curb ramps installed. And I see that on state roads, there are lots of curb cuts that go to dead ends, that go nowhere, that just, you know, they have them in Kingston Village, there's some over by the police station, where they've put in one of those nice little bumpy curb cuts, and then if you ever rolled out into traffic, there's no place to go on the other side of the road. And I don't understand what counting the ADA compliant curb cuts is. If you go on Route 2, halfway up toward Exeter, there's an intersection there with lights that has a curb cut on each corner, and then it's woods. Like there's no sidewalk, there's no driveway, there's no nothing. There's just curb cuts on each corner that are about 4 feet long, and then there's woods. And so I don't know if counting ADA compliant curb cuts matters as much as being thoughtful about their use. That's my thought. We have them in Kingston Village where you can take the curb into traffic and then there's a perpendicular granite curb across the road. It's like a trick, like to get handicap people into the intersection, I'm not sure. But yeah, I guess counting them doesn't seem that important to me if they don't go anywhere. My thoughts.
Street selection, I get this on my mind, is that could be used to help ease where we have parking issues. So I'm thinking about when I go to East Matunic, and I'll go to East Matunic, you know, I'm not gonna try to park down there, it's too busy. I'll park my truck over in Bariso Park and then bike down, you know, so in some areas it could be used to reduce parking issues.
Madam Chair, to this point, in annual reporting, I've always seen these in my past 34 years as well-intended. But Mr. DeStefano asked about resources earlier. This is something that's well-intended but difficult to manage over time and typically falls by the wayside, versus staying on top of policies and initiatives. And it just becomes normal practice. They don't have to report what are the conditions of the ADA ramps because all the conditions are good. It's just practice that the municipality has as it relates to public works and public service department. That there isn't a bad ADA crosswalk because they're managed. Public service and the administration is on top of DOT when there's an issue with their intersections and their systems. So again, I want to say in any policy that I've written, I haven't had an annual reporting component, either when I was with the MPO for 20 years, working for upwards of 22 municipalities, or as a planner within a municipality. Again, it's just hard to manage over time, given structure. So if Rich has to decide whether I'm going to design a new park or prepare this report, he's going to design the report. And then he's instantly out of compliance with a policy or an ordinance, and potentially unfairly.
To your question, we have these performance measures at the state level, and everybody groans every year because they're so meaningless. How many acres of open space did the state add this year, as though all acres of open space were equal, instead of looking at how many new opportunities for certain types of recreation, or how many new acres that are accessible by bus, which are the real questions. What are we providing the public? But instead, the question is, how many acres did you add this year, and how many did you plan to add? Well, you didn't meet the performance measure. Why not? They sound good on paper, but they're meaningless.
Yes. Anything else on this page? Last page has a few bullets. A continuation of the previous page. Sounds similar to what Paul was describing in terms of evaluation.
The dollar amounts.
Right. But I think we all understand the need for evaluation because it helps drive funding and prioritizing funding. So you need that to a certain extent. What's doable and practical, again, certainly a good subject matter for discussion.
So, Madam Chair, listening to the discussion in an attempt to summarize, I think there were some good talking points that when staff prepares a report for council, we can include some of those items. And I think based on the discussion, there's general support for the creation of a master plan and general support of, once that plan is adopted or completed, that some policy or some statement, whether it's in the form of a policy or an ordinance, is created to support that document and the initiation of that document. I can assure you, as a planning director in our department, that when we're looking at projects or having discussions with people or involved when we're asked on any project in town, at least my mind instantly goes to the multimodal aspect of pedestrian, bike, cross sections for road, right-of-way width, street trees, traffic calming, placemaking. My brain works that way. So even devoid of any policy ordinance, we're still contemplating this literally on a daily basis in our normal activities. And I'm sure Rich, to the extent possible and the resources available to him, is doing the same. I think just over time, as development continues in town and as roads get busier, having this type of document to rely on is another tool in our toolbox, similar to a well-done comprehensive plan. Yeah. Yeah. No, so I think, Peter, you're well versed in this over time that, again, the creation of a master plan is great. The determination of whether it sits on a shelf or it has an implementation aspect to it, to your point, is dependent on resources. So some communities choose to continue, we'll say piecemeal, and then others make it a priority. There are some, gold communities in New England, some platinum bike communities, and some communities wear that as a badge that we were just named in New England Magazine or in U.S. News as a platinum bike community. And that goes in all of your PR stuff that goes out, that we are a bike-friendly platinum. Come visit us, come bike here. Come use our trail system because we want you to spend your resources in our community. And that's a form of economic development without sparking development and built infrastructure, just visitors. My wife and I have driven as residents of Connecticut, and we biked multiple times on the East Bay Bike Path. I biked portions of the East Coast Greenway before portions were constructed. We're literally with a machete and a mountain bike, we went through what would be future systems. So again, I think it's interesting to Peter's point, there are steps along the way. There's the creation of a document, there's support and buy-in, there's capital funding. Part of it is capital funding for the plan. So it will require resources to be dedicated by council on the capital improvement plan, on the plan and study side, to initiate a master plan with a consultant. So that's, phase one and buy-in one. Then there's initiative, and I think BPAC plays a strong role in this, in advocating for the allotment of resources to make some of the improvements. We can, to your point, we can ask the state to do it, but when you're doing it along and in consultation with the state, like you're doing your state roads and we're doing our two side roads while you do yours, carries a lot of weight, both in the community and at the state level.
I just think to Peter's point, I guess I don't think of this so much as something that we would require of developers of a new subdivision. It's going to be pedestrians and bicyclists. I think it's going to be people that are fed up with speed. I talked to several people this afternoon who talked about different roads in town that they're not happy with the speed on. People are driving too fast. And I think those are the people that are going to say, we want safer streets. And so now a policy that says, how do you get to a safer street that's good for everybody, is going to be a town and a DOT project, not a developer project so much. I don't really see this as being in the hands of developers so much as the town and the state.
Can I add just a couple more things, though? I believe that the ordinances I've looked at for green complete streets were mostly, the ones that come to mind are Providence and Newport. Providence has a $500 million budget. Newport, I believe, is $150 million. So, I mean, these are communities with much larger budgets. What I'd love to see is an ordinance or a platinum community that has a budget that's similar to ours, so that we can understand, at least we can look at it apples to apples. The other thing is that, we did try to put sidewalks in Matunic from the market, Seaview, all the way up to the school. And we went through, we engineering, we had plans drawn, we got all the permitting, and it was destroyed at council by the residents over there. They did not want it. And the same thing happened up on South Road. And South Road was more along the lines of, you're removing vegetation, widening roads, you remove vegetation on many, many of our roads. In Matunic, it was more along the lines of, it's a farm, let it be a beachy place and all those things. But whether that's the sentiment now, that was 20 years ago, I don't know. But one thing that John Schock always said, and I agree with him, is that any of these projects needs to go to a public hearing first, before any money is invested, because we wasted a lot of money on those projects. I still have the plans in my office. So, I mean, those are the types of things that I get worried about, that ideally they all make sense, but not necessarily everybody is on that plane, so.
Those are really good points, Rich. And although Central Falls was the first community in the state to develop green and complete streets, and obviously has a limited budget, they're also only a square mile. So that changes the aspect of that. I'm wondering if board members feel comfortable to recommend to the council that they support development of a master plan that was customized for South Kingstown, that had inherent flexibility, that would therefore allow for future implementation.
Are you talking about starting over, or having a consultant get involved with the 70-page document that we have, or what would that procedure be?
Jamie could probably
So
elaborate.
I think the BPAC has laid out some groundwork. But if I was asked today whether it is a in-depth master plan, I think I couldn't answer positively to that. So again, staff hasn't finalized the report to council. We're still working on that. But I think, just like a well-done, well-vetted public participation, engaged community plan is important to the process,
Like we did with the comp plan?
just like the planning board does with the comprehensive community plan. It's a 12-month to 24-month process. It's multi-tiered. There's multiple groups involved. There's input, there's outreach, and typically those are led by consultants. There are consultants who can do this extremely well, extremely efficiently. They've done it all over the United States. They've done very good plans. Boston has a complete street design guidelines. It's, I think, 285 pages. It's for the metropolitan area, but it goes from, urban to suburban. And there's some good aspects. It's not what South Kingstown needs. But again, if you look at the flow and documentation and the information contained in there, that type of level of detail and foresight, I think, is important to build ground support, to Peter's point, to Rich's point, when you're going to do capital improvements at some point in time, to show people how you get from point A to point B is important, versus just jump in the pool with me.
I think, I'm comfortable saying that I would like to see the town continue the work that's been done, the development of some sort of a master plan. The council support the concept and perhaps allocate money to the planning department to make it a reality.
Yeah. So again,
So for me, I think that they've been working on this, and they've been working really hard at it for a long time. And to now say to them, well, I'm really glad you invested 2 years in this, now let's find the money to have a consultant throw out the good work you've done and do it themselves. I feel like we should have been, maybe, if that was the goal, the ultimate outcome was to have been honest from the beginning, that they didn't spin their wheels for so long on a document that we aren't even going to review because a consultant's taking over. If that's in case what we're doing here is giving it to a consulting firm to do. And then I don't know who pays for that, but they did really good work on that master plan.
So-
I would like to work with that.
Susan, just
I agree.
their initiative was to advocate for the development of a plan, not to create one. To advocate for the development of a comprehensive bicycle and pedestrian master plan and identify funding opportunities for the implementation of a bicycle and pedestrian projects. That is their stated goal and initiative work items.
Yeah, I don't think we're talking about throwing this out. I think it's, take this and run with it. Let's take this and turn it into something that we can actually use.
There, if you read through the plan, and I don't want to get too far into our review, there are a lot of things in the master plan that says you need to go and study, identify, and create and look at where interconnectivity is needed. Well, that's what a master plan does. So this document says you should go do that. And it's actually saying, in some aspects, you should take this and create a master plan. And that's why I said in the earlier, I will refer to what they have created as a plan. To me, it's a very extensive white paper. But in my world of 20 years as a transportation planner and land use planner with a metropolitan planning organization, and the discussion that was at the table, okay, what are we going to do? If council gave us $1 million, what do? We go to the plan and it says we go to this street and we do something. We don't have that right now. We don't have that.
I do think that this is, I believe it has been 3 years. It has certainly been a worthwhile endeavor, and I think that it should be built upon. And I think that if everyone is in agreement, we could convey those thoughts to the town council and encourage them to do whatever they have to do to formulate a master plan.
Yeah. And I agree with Maria. And again, as your planning director, and your staff, as well as the head of the planning department for the municipality, there's no intent by our department or myself or the people involved to undermine the hard work that the BPAC has done. Without the hard work that the BPAC has done, and again, we've lost two of the three tonight, but Denise is hanging in there. Dorothy is hanging in there tonight. Without their hard work, this discussion would not be occurring tonight. So this is a step, one more hurdle to cross to get you to the finish line. So again, without their hard work, without their 70 pages, without their examples of the ordinance/policy, this discussion would not occur tonight. So I think it's important, and the work they have done, to me, is not wasteful. They didn't just spin their wheels and it's going on a shelf. It gets us to this point. It gets the conversation advanced. So I think it's well done and important to the process.
Great, thank you. Everyone okay with that? Very good.
So again, I'm comfortable with the discussion and the nodding heads and the consensus that I believe you have tonight
Appropriate
to help us formulate our staff review.
correspondence.
And would we see this again before you send something to the council, or?
We're reporting directly to the town manager and then the town manager to council.
But you can obviously convey our thoughts and,
Absolutely. We have the tape. I have, I think, 4 pages of notes. So
Good.
actually, I'm on 5.
all right, let's move on to our next agenda item. Planning Board liaison activities. Who would like to talk about the Affordable Housing Collaborative?
I'll go quick. Maybe Brian can help me out a little bit. We did have a meeting, and we had it at the community center. We kind of short on members, but Brian did a good job making sure everybody got there so that we had a quorum. We talked a little about comprehensive permit requirements of the comprehensive permit process. We talked a little about the inclusionary zoning and the town's inclusionary zoning, and we kind of challenged them, which they seemed willing to take on, looking for maybe making some recommendations or changes to the inclusionary that would make that, where there's possibly a win-win, and possibly make that more appealing to developers than necessarily using the comprehensive process. So there was some questions on that, and I think Brian was going to give them some additional information and kind of educate them on that, and hopefully it could lead to some thought on how we could change that. Present opportunity for both the developers and the town for us to get more units. What else did we talk about, Brian?
think that's pretty much covers it, other than that they continue to look at opportunities for public education and outreach to try and get the community to better understand what the goals of affordable housing are. I think there are still too many people who think 1950s and 60s era housing projects when they hear the word affordable housing. And we'd like to try and counteract that. And I think the last thing I would mention is that we are currently down to 4 members on the Housing Collaborative. So if anybody knows anybody who might be interested in serving or volunteering on that committee, could really use some help, because right now, if one member can't make it, we don't have a quorum.
Do we know where we stand in terms of meeting our goal for affordable housing?
Yeah, we're 6% out of 10.
You are at a level, and I'm going to go on a limb here, that is unachievable. Okay, so the difficulty and this happened in Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and throughout the country, most states used a number of 10%. It didn't matter if your town was already at 9 or at 0.9. They chose 10%. Some communities in that example would have to increase their affordable housing rate by 9.9% of their total housing stock, and others had to do 1%. You literally would have to add 1,000+ units of straight affordable housing.
I think
The difficulty is you're doing that at a percentage basis. Right now, you're doing it 25 or 30%. So for every 100 units, you're doing at the max 30. You're so far in a deficit that you literally can't catch up unless you had a very significant development that came in all affordable. And then again, at some point in time, all those units fall off the market as affordable, deed restricted, and you start over again.
I'm sorry to interrupt, just the shocking number, I think, is that it's something between 450 and 500 units that we're short of in South Kingstown. So, again, to Jamie's point, 25-unit subdivision that's 25% affordable, well, it'll be 1,000 years, and we still can't get there because you're still always 10% of, but I think the real key there is 500 units, is a shocking number. Whether or not we really need that many, I don't know, but.
So as an example, if you did 1,000 new units and you only did 25%, you did 250. You're still short another 200 plus. And
Also, because you just created 750 market, you got to
Right.
get 10% of those. So that's
on top of it, so it was presented that. So I've done, in other planning roles, I've done spreadsheet after spreadsheet after spreadsheet for small municipalities who are in the same straits that you are. To me, as a planner, it's a flaw in the system. I would have preferred a sliding scale where it was somewhat achievable. So if you started at 3%, your goal was to increase X number of units annually. That was something achievable. And the other difficulty is in Rhode Island is once you reach 10%, it doesn't mean you're necessarily exempt from the comprehensive permit process. It changes some of the burden, but you're not automatically exempt. And Connecticut and Massachusetts, when you hit that target, no one can comp permit you anymore. So it's a real achievable goal for some communities if you're hovering in that 8, 9, 10% range, that you do everything you can to get to 10. Because once you get to 10, the comprehensive permit process is no longer available to a developer.
So
But then it also is self-defeating because once you're at 10, you don't look at affordable housing anymore until you're below 10.
Why isn't South Kingston doing something with the state to protect ourselves and say we need a sliding scale? It's inconceivable for us to meet that goal.
Legislators have tried over the years
Gotta keep trying.
unsuccessfully.
And those conversations are actually happening right now, and there may be some potential for modifying the Low Mod Act, because many communities are faced with financial issues. They don't have the infrastructure to increase number of units. So these are ongoing conversations, and I think having various communities look at the Low Mod Act and see how to make it work better, to make it less punitive in nature, those are all things that would help.
What are you calling that act?
The Low Mod Act, the Low and Moderate Housing Act. Amy probably has the statute number. Right, right.
happened in the past. I don't think it's going to be amended in the way that you're hoping it will be amended. If anything, I think the winds are blowing the other way, right? So the legislative changes that were enacted this year to the LMI Housing Act regarding, comp permits and when a municipality can deny them. Now, under some permissible reasons for denial, the board actually has to find that the municipality is making significant progress toward the 10% goal. So I know Maria's closer and has her finger more on the pulse of the legislative stuff than I do. I just, from my perspective, I see it go in the exact opposite way that you're thinking
Well, I
it.
think we could be working at that. I mean,
Exactly. That's why communities need to.
not just saying we don't stand a chance, let's work at it.
But to come back to, to Brian's point, we're not talking about, the sort of brick housing projects of urban redevelopment in the 1960s. Let's take all of our poor people and shove them into some backwater. It's people that live and work in town that can't, or that work in town that can't afford to live here. Starting teachers, the people that bag your groceries, the people that are new in a trade and not necessarily making a lot of money yet, that would like to live in town, and there ought to be an opportunity for them. And I think that always has to be part of the discussion, that we're not talking about those people. We're talking about our people, people that are part of our community.
Right, so actually, the mechanism is what is important, and we need to find more creative ways, because clearly the Low Mod Act, as it currently exists, has not been effective.
Live in town.
Right, right.
So I need to comment on some kind of drum I've been beating now for a few months. I don't know if it's anecdotal, but I just keep hearing about the wave of outside investment that's snapping up properties all over town. And town is becoming a tourist rental destination for deep pockets. And I think that is, I know so many people that have been kicked out of their apartments by a landlord that's selling to an investor. It's student housing during the year, it's Airbnb during the summer. And so not the capital A affordable, deed restricted portion, but just the livable affordable, small a affordable, is just disappearing out from underneath us. And I think, for me, if the town doesn't start acting to rein in short-term rentals and outside investment, we are going to become this Tony town that nobody can afford to live in, and it's just out-of-towners coming for the weekend. And so I think the planning board and the town needs to make a priority of reining this in. And I see that Newport has just put a cap on Airbnb, and then I also saw an article about Warwick putting a cap on their Airbnb, because in Newport, it's the residential neighborhoods, in Warwick, it's the commercial neighborhoods, but in both cases, they're trying to pull back in this explosion of Airbnb. And I think we learned in Narragansett that once people are using their property in a certain way, it is hard to claw it back. And as we're seeing this trend changing in our town, once people have rental or investment properties, getting them back into the hands of families is going to be really hard. I think we need to work to nip this in the bud before it explodes like Narragansett did with the student rentals, not student rentals, the short-term rentals, the seasonal rentals. So yeah, I know I'm now screaming it like every time somebody will listen to me, but that's my drum beat right now.
But I think part of the problem that you're talking about, Susan, is just the cost of real estate. I know where I live on Pond Street, there have been several houses that recently sold on Kenyon. And one of them was this very, very old house that needed a tremendous amount of money put into it to make it livable. Well, most people could not afford to do that. So who comes in? Somebody who's going to pour in the money and convert it to an Airbnb. And that's exactly what happened. And then the house next to it, which also sold for an exorbitant price, is now student housing. So you have these two nice-looking old houses on Kenyon that the neighbors are very upset about, because one is student housing, they don't care about the neighborhood. One is an Airbnb, and they don't care about the neighborhood. So I don't know how you stop it, but it is a creeping syndrome.
My understanding of the Warwick and Newport, and I think Middletown ordinances was you can have an Airbnb if you live on site. So if I have a two-family home and I want to rent out one side of my duplex as an Airbnb all summer, I'm there supervising. But I can't buy up apartments all over town and rent them out as Airbnbs. That wouldn't be allowed. And I think, at least in the article that I saw in the Projo about Warwick, there may be some conflict with the new state law about that, but I like the idea. Sure, you can have an Airbnb, provided you live there.
So I know that for URI students, a bedroom is $800 to $1,000 a month. So for a four-bedroom house, the income potential for that property is enormous. So however would a family rent that house for $4,000 a month? It's not even reasonable. So it is a very good investment opportunity. So.
Peter.
Airbnb thing, I agree, it could be taken advantage of, but there can also be an opportunity for someone that grew up in South Kingston that owns a home that can make money off of that to be able to afford to stay in this community to do it. I mean, I'm not saying, I understand, you're talking Berkshire Hathaway's coming in and buying neighborhoods. I'm saying as like an Airbnb, a small person that has a home. I know like on Ocean Road, it used to happen. People couldn't afford the taxes on the big house, they moved into the little house, they sold the big house so they could at least stay on the property. I think there's opportunities for people to pull themselves out of this with rentals, short-term rentals and things like that. So I think there is opportunity for local people that grew up and lived here, went to school here, we're talking about raising their families here. There's opportunity for them to be able to do that. So I just think those are two things that we have to do.
Madam Chair, we do have a relatively new town manager, although he's been here since May, and I know he has broached the subject matter with council with regards to whether it's a registry. Narragansett for a while have a registry, and developing some type of regulatory oversight or registry oversight, and a lot of it is under the guidance of public safety, so that there's a registry, there's an inspection, so you don't have a basement, four-bedroom apartment conversion with one way out through the center of the home. So again, the matter has been broached by the town manager with council, so there's a lot of things in his inbox that he's trying to get through. So it is something that will stay at the forefront, and I don't mind the continued discussion. No.
And I think Peter's right about certainly the rentals. That's what is the most needed. We hear that all the time from the housing folks. I think it's just, it's frustrating when we approve a comp permit that is quite dense, doesn't have playgrounds or any open space, and then we see the price of the units, and it's like, that's not what we were led to believe. You know, that's difficult. Go ahead, Liz.
Speaking to Peter's point, I think that, yes, an Airbnb can be, or rental can be an investment opportunity, so someone can stay here. But I think the one thing we haven't talked about is the character of neighborhoods. I mean, if you start having, let's say, 2 Airbnbs on a street or rental units on a street, you lose that neighborhood feel. I mean, I know my neighbors. I know if somebody's alone, I'll go check on them. You don't get that when you've got Airbnbs on the street. You don't know who's there because it keeps changing. And same with the rental. So I think that you can't forget that part of our town. It's very important. But it depends on your age also, I think, right?
I hate when we refer to it as Airbnb. It's really just a short-term rental because there's so many different platforms out there. And I think that it's a very complicated topic and there's a discussion on either side. I mean, I have some Airbnbs and I will tell you that 3/4 of my rentals are to multi-generational, and it's an opportunity for a multi-generation to have a vacation, most of which, at least one generation, has come from South Kingstown. So what I have a lot is, I have a lot of, maybe the kids live in South Kingstown and then the grandparents come, or maybe they lived in South Kingstown and now they're coming back because they have friends here, and it's the grandparents, it's the parents, it's the kids. I think South Kingstown, Narragansett has a long history of summer rentals, weekly rentals, and I think it's a really complicated topic. And I'm not sure that that's driving the price of houses. I mean, I think building a house is extremely labor intensive, right? It's something that over the years, you built automobiles, all these other things have become automated. A house is extremely labor intensive. That and the cost of land is what drives the price of the houses. It's not just the demand. If it was more demand, if it was just demand was the only thing driving it, we would just build more houses. But that's not the case. It's very expensive to build a house. But I mean, I think there's good discussion. I think there's good discussion on how it creates or it possibly impacts the neighborhood. I think that, early on, a lot of that Airbnb was people rented it for events, and events cause problems, right? I want to rent the house, I'm going to invite all my friends from Providence, everybody's going to come down, it'll be 30 of us in the house because we all go to the beach, or we're going to have a wedding there, or whatever it is. I think that's a big issue. Take that away, it's pretty much like any other rental. Different car to drive away this week than last week, but it's pretty much like any other rental.
I have strong opinions. If I have to choose between Jay's kids having a place to live in town or people having a nice multi-generational family vacation opportunity, I'm going to wave goodbye to the vacationers and say I would prefer to see town residents having a permanent place to live in a long-term rental. I think they're both great things to have, but I'm always going to choose residents over vacationers. I think the idea, if our affordable housing is competing with Airbnbs because they're a nice vacation opportunity, I don't care about the vacation opportunity. I think they do.
I don't think that they're competing. I don't think.
Well, not in Matunic, it isn't, but right in the middle of town.
Competing, I think that's an oversimplification of the difficulties and all the problems associated with affordable housing and how expensive it is for a house.
Well, this is certainly a discussion that we should continue because there are a lot of moving parts. There, I think, are things that we as a board and as a community could advocate for that would help the situation.
Yeah, I think it has to be reined in to some extent, but
Yeah,
said it's good discussion on both sides of that argument.
definitely. Let's move on to update from planning staff. And Jamie, can we be sure we don't forget to talk about the site visit? And, oh, I forgot, does anyone have any updates on the 300th anniversary celebration? Susan or Joe? No? Okay. So yes, the site visit, and then I thought it might be helpful for Jay to spend a couple minutes just talking about SNEPA, so the board's aware of that.
Actually, sorry, so I have gone to some of the 300th meetings, and I can certainly report that there are some really fabulous activities pulling together for the year, with bonfires and concerts and block parties and speaker series. In October, they're pulling together volunteers from all over the town to plant like 100,000 blue and white hyacinths all over town, so that come spring, the town will just be awash in blue and white flowers. And they're pulling together volunteers to plant them like in key locations all over the town. They're doing a big, during the winter time, they're doing a lighting of the front of Town Hall in blue and white lights that'll persist through March. There's a bonfire on the beach. There's a big New Year's celebration. They're doing a bunch of activities throughout the whole year. There'll be speakers on the history. They're pulling in the Native American population and women's groups and firefighters and all kinds of different elements of town to pull together lots of really fun activities to highlight our history. There's a big parade they're planning that's just specific to the 300th. So yes, there are a bunch of activities. There's listed, I think they have a Facebook page now and their own website now where you can look at different monthly activities throughout the year. So yeah, in October, you'll start seeing like sandwich boards on the side of the roads asking for volunteers to help on one weekend in October to bring a shovel and go plant hyacinths all over town. So yeah, there's something on the town website, but there's also a Facebook page and their own website now to promote the 300th activities.
Excellent.
That's what I
Thank you,
know.
Susan. Jamie?
So I'll try and go quickly through a few items under the updates from the planning director. The first one that I had, which appears on your agenda, is Horsley Witten update. I've been working with Jeff Davis on kind of restructuring the deliverables and how we approach the last kind of $25,000 of the contract as it relates to mixed use on the upper portion of Main Street and Tower Hill. So I hope to have that wrapped up in the next 2 weeks with a clear understanding of project and deliverables so that they continue along their path of preparing the documents that they have for us. With regards to Maria and I had a couple of conversations in the past couple of weeks after the presentation by a potential development team for a comprehensive permit in South County Commons behind the Fairfield Marriott. And Maria potentially suggested that the planning board have a special meeting and site visit, and she wanted to bring that up this evening. The other alternative to that would be, staff could be available to meet at any time during our normal business hours to bring you to the site so you understand the complexity of the site, where the building's being proposed, what the implications are, what's its relationship with the Fairfield. So again, she just wanted me to bring that topic up this evening.
Yeah, and we didn't get to it till almost 11 o'clock that night for pre-application. The architect wasn't there, and I think there's always something to be gained by a site visit when we have a good number of board members there and can ask questions and walk the site, and it's valuable, especially for yeah, at least where it's full of stormwater structures right now. There's a wooded edge, but it's the topography is somewhat challenging at the moment, but that's because it's been intentionally designed to manage stormwater. So again, being there on the site is just so much better than looking at a map or even Google Maps. You don't get the same sense of anything.
Just so I understand, there are a million meetings and I try to limit
Yep.
as many as possible.
Right.
I'm trying to think of, we're going to go there and look at where we think the building's going to go.
With a map and an explanation from staff, and possibly the engineer as well, and
So,
anybody.
and Maria, just, again, I have a vast experience in 3 states, but my understanding, and we have counsel here, when you do a site walk, it's a public meeting, and you have to keep meeting minutes, and you're supposed to record the meeting. So when you're having a site walk, I've always been taught, in essence, The site walk is not for purpose of discussion. It's for purposes of finding where you are in the ground and understanding where things are. But it's hard to engage in a conversation with a group of people, with a consultant, with multiple conversations, and keep a record of that meeting. So I've in essence been taught that you're limited to questions associated with, am I standing at where the proposed corner of the building is, in kind of geographic locational things. It's not a discussion, complete discussion, because it's almost impossible. You know, Peter's walking next to Jay, having a conversation with Joe, while I'm walking next to Susan and Maria, who have a different question, and the developers, engineers walking next to Liz and Paul, having a third conversation. So again, it's difficult. So if there is a site walk, I think it needs to be clear what the purpose is and what the intentions are, and you know, how that functions.
North Woods, too.
So simple suggestion here, and I meant to do this and never got to it. We had a plan that was presented at the last meeting. If we took the building footprint and georeferenced it, just overlaid it on an aerial photo with some 2-foot contours, you know, so that you can look at the aerial photo, you can look at the site plan, but for some people it's difficult to sort of put the two together. But if you just take that plan, georeference it, so we can see the size of the footprint on the existing landscape, I think that would be really helpful. I think it would answer a lot of questions.
So my concern is that because it was pre-application, which we know how valuable that stage is, before an applicant has done a lot of detailed engineering work, I don't think they got a tremendous amount of feedback from us. Again, it was almost 11 at night. We had had a very lengthy meeting. The architect wasn't there to make the presentation, and the idea of getting out ahead of this, I think, is an important one, so that the applicant doesn't go away thinking, you know, they think it's great, and maybe we don't, or maybe we need to, again, be able to ask some questions in an organized fashion and be out at the site. I think that's invaluable. We don't do it that often, and I have been on numerous site visits over the years, and although it's a requirement that it's publicly noticed, I think it's worthwhile. Yeah, I mean, we could do it, yeah. Whatever works for everyone. So, like to get everyone's feedback if they think it's worthwhile.
So I have a question. So, Jay, you had said that you haven't heard from them again since. Do you have any idea? So, personally, maybe that follows what Maria says. I was tired and hungry, and I was so for me, I was horrified by the project. And then a couple of planning board members said, oh, I'm interested in that project. And it sort of threw me because I didn't realize we were even personally going to even talk about that project because I didn't
Madam
like
Chair, if I just may interrupt quickly. This is under Planning Director report.
Sorry.
I would advise not to comment on the likability or non-likability of a project that's not before you and not on your agenda. The discussion tonight is the viability of
Yes,
having
let's
a site
stick to
visit.
that.
So I apologize, that was off, I shouldn't have done that. But if the project that you might see next time won't resemble the one we've already seen, then I think I might agree with Jamie that a walkabout to look at a project that may be entirely different the next time we see it might not be.
So, and to Susan's point, I think, and it may be a slightly different model than Maria has partaken in before, but I found it to be very productive. Staff is extremely capable to meet with individuals on the site. And again, some people have the ability to see a site, look at a plan, geo-reference it in their head, spin the building 3D, and understand the implications of it as it relates to the surrounding area. Not everyone has that ability. We have the ability to walk you as individuals through that process. We're not bound by the meeting schedule. We're not bound by recording the events, posting the meeting, but we can make each and every one of you, if you take advantage of this, extremely familiar with the site, the interrelationship with the proposed building on the site, how it relates to height and footprint and surrounding area, and potentially ask the applicant back to a work session possibly, where they're number one on the agenda, to Susan's point and even Maria's point this evening. It's hard to remain focused, not being on the site, not doing it when your minds are fresh, and doing it at 10:45 after a fairly intense meeting prior to them coming in, and having their full team here, having access to the architect to maybe have a discussion about density and bulk and size and fenestration and architecture, and see if and have an engaged conversation. It's hard to do that in the field given the constraints of the way you're supposed to run a meeting with the Open Meetings Act. It's a slightly different model than some of you may be used to, but I believe over past history it's been a productive model. It's different, but again, giving you all the tools and the access and information so when they're here, you can engage in a productive meeting with them. And it gives you flexibility. Maria may be able to meet at 8 in the morning. Peter may be able to meet at 3. Paul may want it at the beginning or end of his workday. And other people have different flexibility. Yeah. You know, and again, between Jay and Brian and I, we can all be vetted and be available for you.
I mean, I like the idea of a site visit. I think that several times in the past has been pretty beneficial. I mean, there's concerns that's maybe raised that don't get addressed till a following meeting, and we have discussions about whatever we saw. But I'm thinking of even projects like the one on Broad Rock, that there was a lot of neighbors that had concern, and after we did a site visit, there was a redesign of the subdivision to reduce the number of lots. So I think it's always good to see the site and understand the constraints, even if some of your concerns turn out to be not necessarily an issue after you have when you have a meeting, but at least you see it firsthand.
Anyone else? Yes, no? I have one other comment. Even though I do respect that we all have different schedules, and I thank you for the offer to have staff take us out individually, I think there is some benefit in going in groups, or at least with other people. You can bounce ideas off each other.
It's not the, so Liz, under the Open Meeting Act, the conversation needs to have minutes and should be recorded. The purpose of the site visit is not to engage in the conversation on the site. The purpose of the site visit is to get an understanding of the site. So I've always been taught by some of the leading land use attorneys, not just in states or New England, in the country, that in essence you walk the site in silence. You observe, you have it with a site plan, and then you have discussions as a group at a landing area or somewhere where you have the ability to take meeting minutes. So again, I'm agreeing but disagreeing in some. It's the structure of the meeting.
Jamie, that has not been my experience over the years. we have been allowed to ask questions, say, you know, where is the corner of the building? You know,
Geo-referencing where the corner of the meeting is, getting engaged in
would
the
the
conversation about heights and likes and dislikes becomes questionable. So again, if you're, to Maria's point, looking at the site plan and turning to the engineer as a group, so that as staff, we can say, Maria Mack asked, are we standing in the southwest corner of the building? The question is asked. The answer by the engineer in a structured environment is, no, it's 20 feet over there. And again, some of the aspects is I would ask the applicant to give us rough stakes of the corners of the building, which makes the whole process simplified. And then again, if they use caution tape and can give you the perimeter of the building, that's even better.
As that site exists right now, I think some of those stakes would be out in the woods down the hill.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Get nervous about site visits for the reasons that Jamie just said, because you can get into trouble, and there have been open meetings opinions. You can talk about anything you want at a site visit, provided that minutes are taken. And I think it's more the logistical challenge with staff. You know, a site visit is less formal than a meeting, right? You're walking around, you're not sitting down, you're outside, it's a nice day. The purpose, you would think, is to walk around, but then it becomes hard to capture the discussion. So if it's done properly, you can do it just like you do any meeting here. The difficulty is it's sometimes hard to corral a board and the public and a bunch of other people who show up. My 2 cents on site visits is they should be used sparingly, because otherwise you might as well do a site visit on every project. And I would also encourage not to do a site visit too soon. So in other words, maybe some of the things that the public might say at an initial meeting might inform whether you really need a site visit, and maybe you do on this one. Those are my 2 cents. Open meetings, yeah. You just need to ensure that the public is able to hear and participate where they're legally required to. And so for a meeting like this, there would be no public comment, no requirement to let people ask questions. But we wouldn't want side conversation, we wouldn't want you to walk over to one part of the building and speak with a member of the development team. So as long as you guys follow the rules that we set forth, that's no problem. You can't control the public.
We wouldn't speak with them, because we would, if they attempted to engage with us or with staff would say, any of your comments should be voiced at a public hearing where it can be put on the record. This is a site visit for the board. And this board is trainable. We can follow directions. I think we will be able to comply with the appropriate.
I have a question as a newbie on the board. Why can't we do a site visit as part of a work session? I mean, but it's still considered a public meeting?
Yes. Any quorum of the board conducting business as a board is a meeting.
What if we went out there casually?
It doesn't.
Okay.
No.
I mean, we regularly did this in the last town that I worked in, where the board would actually divide up in pairs, and they would go on separate days at separate times and do their site walks in pairs. That's not a meeting, it's not a quorum. Doesn't have to be advertised, doesn't have to be publicly noticed.
I hear what you say about not being too early, but at the same time, we don't want to lead the developer potentially down a path that we seem to be, okay with it or not. I know this last project, they presented it. I can visualize in my mind what a 12-unit apartment building looks like. A 7-unit, not so much. And then I saw that sketch, I'm like, holy mackerel, that thing is enormous. So that's just
No, and I agree with Maria. Additional information, boots on the ground is important. There's just two different methods to give you that information.
It's almost 9 o'clock, back to the original question. Yes on the site visit or no? Let's just try to make a decision. Robin, yes. Peter? Liz?
Yes.
Susan? Either way. Sorry. Paul?
Now, my next question is, if you were to do a site visit, are you asking for the applicant and their entire team to be there, or you just want to have a site visit? You're going to announce a meeting for a site visit with staff, and the applicant will let the potential applicant or developer know that the planning board wanted to do this, and you are welcome to attend. Okay. Fair assessment? I could develop a list right now.
As long as we can get a good sense, even if the applicant's not here, for mass, scale, and how intrusive, how large parking will be, and how that all fits on the site. Because one of my big concerns about this is that too big? Is that too many? That's truthfully, that's, you know, and looking at the site, is that too many? Yeah, well, if the corners were marked, if you knew that these were the corners, this is a lot, this is the corners, this is how much the parking is, this is how close the parking comes to the property lines, all those things we've got to.
Limit of disturbance, exactly. Yeah, those are, I think they're reasonable.
Aye, understood.
Please continue, Jamie.
I'm just looking at my list. Just one other quick item was with regards to emergency management services. We did submit an RFQ for architectural and engineering services, so that project on Ministerial Road is moving forward. We have on October 17th, I think it's the 17th, it's a Friday. Could be the 14th, sorry, without looking at a calendar. Responses back on that, so that will be moving forward. And late fall, early spring, we'll bring text amendments and zone change forward to rezone that government institutional 2. So it'll be a separate zone. And I think Jay will brief you on SNEPA, and your other item that you have is Mr. Bourbonnais on item number 2, DEM wastewater ordinance amendments. And I'll just set the table for that. Rich has a proposed wastewater ordinance amendment that he will be bringing to town council next week, I believe, Rich, correct? And his mindset was that when he goes to council, in typical fashion, they're always concerned when it comes to kind of land use assets. Have you gone, with that, Mr. Bourbonnais?
It might help. So we're making a change to the wastewater ordinance. It involves a lot of different things. Some of it is some of the things that we've been collecting over the years. You know, OWTS was not defined. It was still referencing ISDS. Things like that. There were a lot of inspection things that we've picked up over the years. Methods for inspection or what types of inspection we want. Even recently, we videotaped a sewer line, a sewer installation, and we were questioned as to why we were videotaping it. Well, we had a small item in there that said, well, you can, at the discretion of the public services director, but in order to be a little more specific, we kind of made those changes to the ordinance. But the real reason why we're changing it now, specifically now, why it's happening now, is that DEM in recent years, maybe about 3 years ago, in an effort to try to get their arms around some of the gaps in regulation, specifically with respect to breweries and how their wastewater is treated, both on-site and how it's sent downstream. In an effort to get that under wraps, what they did was they asked wastewater facilities such as ours in towns such as us to look at our ordinances. They wanted us to specifically look at what our local limits were. So the limits of not only, iron, zinc, and all these other those metals and things, but also really the bigger items were the BOD level and the TSS level of the material. So the biochemical oxygen demand, biological oxygen demand, and the total suspended solids in the wastewater, and what our limits were for those. So we had a limit of, let's just to kind of give you an idea what that means, but with respect to our ordinance, but we had a limit of, I believe it was maybe 250 milligrams per liter was allowed by any discharge. So most commercial developments, industrial developments in town were able to stay under that threshold. But meanwhile, breweries are coming on the scene, and they're discharging in upwards of 5,000 or more milligrams per liter, and that could equate to 30 or 40, 300 pounds of BOD or TSS. So their levels were just really, really high. So we didn't want to. So what DM so we didn't want to shut these businesses down or anything like that. Nobody wants to do that. But we want to start to understand how they can fit with some of within our ability to treat that much. So what we did was first thing we did was hire Jim Jeremiah, who was an engineer, and they came in and redid our limit study. That study looks at what not only what's happening in our system, how much BOD we're taking in, how much TSS we're taking in, but also looked at what was the capacity of our system to take even more, and it really is pretty good. We have a pretty good capacity there to take more BOD and TSS, but what we had to do was look at residential waste, we had to look at commercial waste, industrial waste, all those things, and then say, okay, now how much are we going to dedicate to breweries? Okay, and so once that was determined, it was how much is going to go to each of the breweries in town, and then we can start to say, okay, now we can start, in effect, regulating these breweries that are discharging this waste. So again, it's not to stop these businesses or even stop them coming in. From coming in. It's just a way to understand how they're operating, what they're putting in our system, and if we can treat it, and also to kind of get them into the fold, to begin to start to work with them on how to manage that waste on site. Much of it has to be done on site. So what's going to happen is that these businesses are going to be required to install a testing manhole, things like that. And then if necessary, they're going to be installing methods for pretreatment, settling tanks, things like that. What's nice about the way this is written is that it's not saying that you can't, we're not looking at it over we're looking at it at a day at a time, so they can emit only so much of these items into the system in any particular day. So what they can do is they can actually hold back material and then discharge it over a longer period of time so that they're not going over their threshold. So we're trying to work with these systems and trying to work with these businesses to try to make it work, but in the meantime, we're trying to protect our ability to maintain. At the end of all this, the effluent coming out of our system is required to be by EPA standard or DM standard, it's 30 milligrams per liter. So in order for us to treat some of these BOD levels, if they were to dump all this waste at once, which is what breweries have been doing. They brew a batch, they dump the mash, it goes into the system, it's gone, and it happens in a day, and it's a tremendous amount of BOD. We can't treat that much. So we will be in violation, therefore we have to get them under wraps. And that's what the ordinance is, that's what the precipice of this, what really kind of pushed this ordinance forward. So now we'll go to the council for its, for an introduction sort of on Monday. Jim Jeremiah will be there, Kathy Perez will be there as well from our wastewater treatment facility, so she can answer any operational questions. And then hopefully we'll go to a public a public meeting maybe in October. And then if it passes, we'll be in good shape. They've given us, I believe it's November 19th as a deadline. DM has given us that deadline to get this wrapped up. What's going to be impressed upon the council is that this is not our, regulation necessarily. This is DEM, federal agencies coming down to say that these things have to happen. Breweries were relatively, I think it was in recent years, breweries became sort of, I don't know, they just were on the scene. They exploded, and so now, this is what happens, something new comes on, and then we'll get something else. Other types of industries that have a real big effect on these types of systems are, and I dealt with it when I did some engineering for Seafresh up in Davisville, but it's fishing, fish type places. So these types of holding tanks and all this is all over Galilee, but they're in a different part of, they're not in our system. They don't go to Westmoreland, they go to Scarborough. So they're not affected.
Thanks, Rich.
Thank you.
Questions for Rich?
Could you help me understand the limits? Because when I look at the changes in red, none, does that mean that there can be no effluent on a monthly average? And then the daily max has gone way up? Which I thought you just said you don't want them to discharge all at once. But, looking at BOD here, but I'm saying maximum daily limit, 515 ppm, and monthly average 0. I'm not understanding that.
So we're just not looking at a month at a time anymore. We want to just look at each day and what they're discharging each day. We're regulating by the day. So they're not able to, let's say, and if there was a monthly limit, it would allow them to, maybe wait until a certain period to dump more effluent. We're just trying to maintain it by the day, so that allows us to go in any particular day and we can test and we can regulate on a daily basis. We're just not concerned.
Okay, so none means you won't receive that data as a monthly average. But doesn't it say that any day then they could put out what used to be their cap for the month? No, they could put that out every day?
No, they will have a daily limit.
Right, so if you look, I'm looking at BOD, right? So their monthly limit used to be 519, and now
Right.
their daily limit is 519.
Right, so we have the capacity for 519 on a daily basis.
Daily.
So we're moving that over to the daily basis,
Okay,
okay?
yep, thank you.
But I want to also explain that breweries aren't even in this. So what the feds have done, they've created these federal codes for business types, and breweries and manufacturers of malt beverage, things like that, are categorized differently. Those categories now are pulled from that table, and what we do in this ordinance is reference the local limits guide that we prepared, which actually specifically mentions those businesses. So what we've tried to do here is to move the breweries over to what would be a loading number rather than a daily dose. So they're allowed in pounds a certain limit because like I said, breweries can't meet even 519 milligrams per liter. They're at 2,000, but at 2,000 they're still under. One of the businesses is 189 pounds a day. So because we had the capacity there, so what we're trying to do is distribute the capacity, and we've only used 90% of it, just in case anybody else comes online. That's why it's kind of important. It's kind of important that you see this end of it, because this board is what approves some of those types of facilities at times. So it's good to understand that sometimes they're regulated in different fashions other than just land use. But we do have a little more capacity in there for even another business if it were to come in, or if one of these businesses were to expand in some way and start showing flows that are a little bit higher than what they have been, so.
Did you say our capacity is up to 90% with these numbers?
What I'm saying is that what we've put out in a regulatory sense and allotted to these different businesses is 90% of what we have available to those categories. So we do have some fluff in there to allow for either expansion of those existing businesses that are already allotted a certain amount, or the addition of another business that may want to come online.
Thanks.
So Rich's term of fluff is calculated reserves.
Good to have that definition.
The technical engineering term, fluff.
Any other questions?
I have one quick question. So this is for a sewer system,
Yes.
but not anything, if there's a private OWTS on site, and then the groundwater or whatever, that's not part of this?
It is not. So OWTS is always regulated by DEM. So we don't regulate OWTS, although we do require inspections and those types of things, but we do not regulate the processes that are happening on those, with those systems. Restaurants, so Tilted Barn put a system in. Tilted Barn is a brewery. I don't know if you've ever been. It's fantastic. But they were a small little place. They built that big place out in front. It's wonderful. And but they have an OWTS. So it's strictly regulated, and it's a different town altogether, but strictly regulated at the DEM level. They have a lot of tanks there too, by the way, and those are pumped on a very regular basis. That's what they're doing. And they're hauling it off to places like ours, and then we're regulating the septage from those pump outs. We can.
Okay. So does this, so I know that's a brewery, is this also potentially a winery that's in town that is the same?
Well,
The
but they're
winery
not.
would have the same problems that the brewery does?
Oh, they do.
Okay.
They do. But again, the one that we have in town is regulated by DEM. It's a septic system. If they were online with us or they were in our system, then we would have them included here.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you, Rich. I think this gives us insight and appreciation for much of the complex work that you do. Yet another ordinance that we probably had not read. Jay, do you want to talk about SNEPA briefly?
Sure. For those of you that don't know, the American Planning Association Conference is returning to Providence on October 6th and 7th. First time we've been back in Providence since 2017. The pandemic hit the pause button in virtual for 2 years with the pandemic ran its route. I am chairing the conference committee. And registration is set to close on Friday. I think we're going to extend it into next week, but if any board members are interested in attending, you can go to SNEPA, SNEPA.org, SNEPA.org, and register there. We're going to have 2 days of sessions. There's also 7 different movement workshops. White tour of Providence, Black History tour of Providence, open architecture tour of Providence. We canceled these projects on board due to but it should be exciting. Happy to be chairing it, and look forward to seeing a bunch of planners and engineers in Providence.
Cost of registration?
For APA members, the 2-day conference is $275, and the 1-day conference fee is somewhere around $95.
Are any of us APA members? So cost for others? Okay.
Between $60 and $80. The intent is to encourage people to join APA.
Great, thanks, Jay.
And there are also sponsorship opportunities still available.
Is that a weekend or weekdays? Nice.
Thanks. Legal updates. Yeah. Can we? Oh, wow, happy birthday, Jamie.
I said 9 p.m., but we've blown.
So
we've
can
blown
we
that.
talk about this at, can we add something on to our next meeting? Or, I mean, I know we have a time issue with the cannabis.
I think
far as the
the
council.
primary crux of what Amy's trying to accomplish with language for, on the regulatory side is, from my perspective, is where. The language is pretty regulatory in nature, similar to the medical marijuana facilities, you know, separating distances, traffic, appropriateness of use, and locational based. And I think some of it is right now it's spelled out to be only allowed in the commercial highway district. We talked last month about refining that a little bit, that says highway commercial with direct access to and frontage on a state-approved, state-numbered route. That's my kind of 2 cents for tonight, but I know Amy was prepared to go more in-depth on that. I don't know how time-sensitive everything is, Amy, and whether we can potentially add it to the agenda for your regularly scheduled meeting, which may be extensive, or go to your next work session 4 weeks from now.
What's the deadline by which we need to make a recommendation to the town council? Yes. Yes. We have to get out our crystal balls, you know? Well, we do have an October work session that we could continue this to, and then it really would be, you know, the council would need to put the notice out and so on, and have their hearing, so. Is everyone all right with doing that, since it's now getting close to 9:30? Okay. And you could send out a memo in the interim, certainly. Okay, sure. Yeah. And is there any mechanism by which our current law remains in place until the adoption or revision of that occurs? Mhm. That'd be great. Certainly makes the case for legislation having a date of implementation that, gives all the communities a little bit of time, right? See, it is getting late. If there's nothing else, would someone like to make a motion to adjourn? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Good night, everyone.